Hey, today I'm going to go over my fast template deployments in the lab. I had two people reach out to me last week around fast templates, so I felt like this would be a really good use case for the big IP explanation. Now, when we think about fast templates, if you don't know what they are, they're an overlay to AS3. AS3 is a full declarative item, meaning every option within that particular class has to be defined in some manner, with the exceptions of some of the defaults. Now, there are many use cases where I use just raw AS3, and then there are a few use cases where I would use fast. And the reason that this becomes so important is that fast gives me a templating engine to send in just parameters that I need for creating that application. It also gives me a mechanism to tie what I like to call the pyramid of automation, to tie something that's going to create the self-service declaration to the big IP. Now, if I'm using something like ServiceNow or in some cases Terraform or Ansible Tower, where I'm generating a declaration or a JSON payload, fast is actually easier because I can set all the defaults that I want and only have to provide the very specific parts of that application. And you'll see that in a little bit when I show off mine. So when I look for things for fast, I'm looking for wherever somebody's at kind of the top of that pyramid of automation and they want to send in just the known parts so that an individual contributor, like an application owner, doesn't have to know everything about AS3. They only have to know the very few parts around their application to make it actually work. I'm going to walk you through some of the steps of what it looks like going through. First of all, this is the documentation page for fast. There's some good information here. Fast in itself is the presentation pane for AS3. AS3 has no, presentation pane. Similar to IAPS in the past, there was two parts. There was the presentation pane and then there was the actual configuration part of it. Think of AS3 as the configuration part and fast being the template that lives on top of it. Now you can change that template that you're going to send in, or use the recommended ones that come from. So you could create your own, or you could use some of them that come in. So the first part is here. It talks about creating templates. That's great. Troubleshooting, whatever, right? A bunch of pieces in here for the landing page. In the lab, I first have to make sure that it's installed. It is an external package. So in mine, as everybody knows at this point, I use Ansible for my kind of onboarding or bootstrapping. So within the lab, if you're looking for that kind of bootstrapping, it's under Big IP Ansible configuration, right? And then I've got a role for installing the ATC. And in my case, I install all of them. You can see some versions that are in here. That's going to pull down the particular version. And this is my fast one. So when I run this particular onboarding Ansible part of it, right, it always makes sure that the correct version of fast is installed. Or if I need to upgrade my fast deployments, I go in and I change the version to the version I want, right? And then the next time the pipeline runs, it goes in and installs that fast application, or I guess the fast package. When it gets installed inside the Big IP, it's going to look like this. Under Application Services and Apps LX, you'll see this turn up and then turn green. Now, that's great, but I'm automation driven and I don't want to do these things inside here. So I want to do it within a programmatic deployment. So if I do look inside here though, to keep in mind of some of the pieces that come with it, there are predefined templates, which are awesome for things if I want to do HTTP or IAS, or I think there's some Microsoft specific ones in here. There's also a really cool one that a peer of mine created called the blue-green deployment template. That's not a native Big IP feature, but there is one in the fast templates to be able to do that, right? Load balance between different kinds of pools. Down below, there's some sample ones. There's also some really cool stuff for IPAM if you wanted to work on those. When you interact with fast, you're actually interacting with this module, right? Or this external resource. And when you're interacting with it, you have to give it some information around what's going to be configured. Now, there are two ways that I would use to interact with this thing. The first one is Ansible and the second one is Terraform. There's a module for Ansible. It's the Big IP fast application. And this is the part where one of my coworkers and I were discussing this last week. It's this template structure. So the module itself requires the template to be defined. In this case, it's examples sample HTTP. And if you look on the Big IP, there's sample HTTP. So you're telling basically fast through the module which template you're going to use. The same thing is for Terraform. So there's the big IP fast application, whatever the name of it's going to be in this case. And then there's the template and then the file, that payload that you're going to send over. So I'm going to use Terraform because this is my day 2 operation of building applications and showing what that looks like. So under the lab, when I build an a fast application, that lives under big IP, Terraform, configuration, and then I have 3 different Terraform files in here for deploying services different ways to the big IP. And in this particular one, it's done via fast. So I've got the fast application, the name of it. These are my HTTP manifests, and these are my LDAP manifests. And I break them out that way because I have to specify that template that resource is going to use. So this means all of my fast applications land within, right, the folder and then basically the template type. So HTTP, and then we can see this demo one. Now in here, you can see this is very, very minimal. I've got where it's going to go, the app name, the virtual address, the pool member addresses, or in this case, address, if I wanted to turn on service discovery for event type, which is a totally different feature that we're not going to cover today. But all I have to know is these basically 4 things. And as an application owner, that's significantly easier. Now, here's where this becomes even more inception. When I'm using AS3, it's very big IP specific. It's created specifically on this instance for this application. Fast is a template-driven structure, so I'm going to use it more in fleet management. I may have many fast templates deployed, and then I can just rotate through the big IPs with specific, let's say, virtual server addresses and land on all of those. Now, I can do that with some automation magic in big IP right now, but in big IP next, which we'll go through in some future lab, it's almost all driven that way. Fast is thought of as a templating fleet management system. AS3 is thought of as an application specific on a big IP tool. So in this case, I'm going to just throw in only these pieces. And then what happens is the fast template has a bunch of defaults. And I can essentially stamp over the defaults by changing a value in here, or I can leave the defaults the way they are and it'll deploy it into the big IP. So what this looks like when I come over into my big IP, you can see I have it deployed. So HTTP application, right? All of these settings, I guess I should go back and show you the one that's actually deployed. All of these settings that live inside the default template of big IP fast template get filled out for me, and I don't have to know what they are. I, as an application owner, don't have to know about SNAT. I don't have to know about AutoMap, persistency, TLS. I don't have to know about any of these things because they're defaulted in the template. And all I'm doing is basically passing in parameters over parameters that exist to be able to build out my application. So if I look through here, I could manually do this, and that's great. But being programmatic, I don't want to. Down at the very bottom in the debug view, you can actually see what's rendered. So the rendering is what happens via AS3. So remember, fast sits on top of AS3. So if I was going to create this manually via AS3, I would have to create a declaration that included all of these parts. But I didn't because I used fast. All I had to hand in was this, right? So it makes it very easy to make it repeatable. It also means that that upper level orchestration tool only has to create something very small and very specific, and the application owner doesn't have to know too much about it. Now, if I look at what I inputted into fast, it looks like this. So even though my line of code was only, let's see, 23 lines, what fast actually rendered on top of was all of this. So all of these were default settings I could stamp on top of or leave without rendering. Right? So this allows me to do fleet management. It allows me to push services in. It allows me to add things like service discovery, which is really cool if you're doing things like FQDN or your applications live in public clouds and you want to do service discovery based off like tags or labels. So it gives me a bunch of new services that exist within the Big IP platform through those automation tool chains. But it also lets me only have to manage something very, very simplistic, which is way easier to create in like ServiceNow than it is to create this whole rendered AS3 declaration. So there's a ton of stuff to go in there. So the way it gets deployed, right? We'll go over that one last time. My fast applications live in Terraform, and those are referenced via a folder. So I have an individual template file, right? For each file that lives in this folder, it's going to iterate over and make sure that those get passed through, right? And then I'm going to call out that specific template that I'm using. That way, as ownerships 4 services in my big IPs. I need to create a new one. I just create that very minimalistic piece. I drop it in the HTTP folder or the LDAP or whatever kind of template structure that I want to use. Terraform swings back through, it grabs those things and it pushes them into the big IP. The same thing happens with changes. So go back to my face. At this point, that was an overview of how I use Fast in the lab and where it would be useful in customer environments. Again, that kind of upper level orchestration where you're only wanting to generate something off of an application owner like knowledge base and not having to understand all of AS3. It'll become very important in future releases of Big IP when you think of Fast as more of the fleet management input system than thinking of AS3 as that whole declaration with all the variable options and classes and pieces. As always, I wish everybody good luck. If you have any questions or have any recommendations on videos, open an issue. Have a great day.